Hello everybody, in this video I'm going to be going over another Leetcode question. This one is 217, contains duplicate. If this is helpful to you in any way, any feedback, good or bad, would be appreciated, as that can help me gauge my videos and see if I can improve on anything. Any comments are also really appreciated. So in this question, given an integer array nums, return true if any value appears at least twice in the array, and return false if every element is distinct. This is a pretty common interview question, definitely a first round interview question at least. I've personally had this asked me before, and it's just a good question to see if you know your basics about looping and conditional statements. So they gave us some examples, but I'm going to get straight to the point here as this is pretty self-explanatory. In this first array, they've sent us an array that has 1 twice in it, so that would be true. Here it's 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be false because there's no duplicates. And in this case, there's definitely duplicates, as you can see from the beginning. And there's also a few others. This is a good problem to demonstrate, a brute force solution and a more optimal one. So I will start off with the brute force here, since that's probably a good way to start the question off. The brute force way would be to do your traditional, two loop kind of question where you create one outer loop, and then you also create an inner loop. So we would start at 1, and then we would also start with the inner loop at the next index and see if that index is equal to the 1. If it's not, we would increment the inner loop. Is 3 equal to 1? It's not. We would go to the next one. Is 1 equal to 1? That would be true, so then we would return true. And that would be a brute force way of doing it, which would mean that since you're doing 2 loops, it would be n squared of time, but it would also be constant space. So I guess we can start with that. And with all these Leetcode questions, you always want to start off with your base cases. This is something that people tend to forget. But in this case, your base case would be if the array that they passed you in was null, or if the array at a length of 0, meaning they passed you in an array with no elements, then we could just return false because we know for sure there's no duplicates in an array that doesn't have anything inside of it. And then after that, once we get past that point, we could then do our double for loop. So we can create one outer for loop that will traverse the whole array. And then we will create another inner for loop that will start at I plus 1. It will check to see if it's less than the size of the array. And then we will increment j. And so the important part here is that you start at I plus 1. If you didn't start at I plus 1, then let's just walk through an example. Our outer loop would then start at 1. Our inner loop would also start at 1. And then we will check to see if 1 equals 1, which we don't want to do. We want to see if 1 is equal to any other of the numbers in the array. So that's why you do I plus 1. So make sure you don't forget this part. And then all you want to check to see is if nums at point I equals nums at point j. If it does return true, that means we found a duplicate. If it doesn't, we don't want to do anything. We just want to keep letting the loops go out the entire array. And if we do get out of these for loops, then we know we never found a duplicate because we would have just hit the return statement. So by default, at the end, we can just go ahead and return false. And this would be your brute force solution. It's pretty straightforward, but it's not optimal. So if I just hit run real quick. What did we miss? We got an example. It wouldn't be a Leetcode question, but this is why they're good for interviews. So we were given 1, 2, 3, 4, and that should be false, but we got true. So why would we get true? A plus plus, I plus plus. Not sure why that's 1 plus I. That should be I plus 1. Let me just make sure. There we go. Yeah, I kind of messed up that inner loop. That should have been I plus 1. But that's why these questions are good, because during an interview, you're usually not going to instantly give the right solution, so you might have to work through it. But this is the brute force solution. And another way we could do this, so if you didn't want to do it in n squared time, then you probably would have to use some sort of data structure that can hold the integers in the array and help you keep track of what you've come across. So I'm going to just go ahead and restart this. So because we're looking for distinct elements, probably the most great data structure that would come to mind would be a set or a hash set. And if you don't know what a set is, it's pretty much a data structure that will only store unique elements. So we can use that to check whether or not there's duplicates. So we're still going to do our same base case. If nums equals null, or I cannot type right now, or if nums.length equals 0. I really don't like the Leetcode autocorrect, sorry about that. Then return false. Otherwise, we're going to create a hash set, which will store the integers, since that's what's getting passed in. So we'll just say checked numbers, I guess, equal to a new hash set of integers, but I actually don't need that part. And then we'll say we will create a for loop where we will just walk through the loop again. So we'll start at 0. We'll check to see if it's less than the size of the array. Then we'll increment. And then the first thing we want to do is we want to check if the current number that we're at in the array is already in our hash set. So in that case, if checked numbers dot contains, and I'll also just create a variable, a local one to the loop that has the current number just to make it cleaner. So we'll just say int current num equals nums at point I. And we'll say that if checked numbers contains the current num, then we want to return true. Else, if it's not, we want to add it to our hash set so that in case we come across it again at a future iteration, we at least know that we did come across it. So we would then do checked nums or numbers dot add, and we would add the current num. So if, I just want to make sure my brackets are correct. Brackets. Okay. We would increment. And then if we do get out of the loop, once again, we know we didn't find a duplicate, so we would just return false. So let me just run this to make sure that this works. Cannot find symbol, checked numbers. That's because our hash set is called checked numbers. Rerun this. Accepted. So I'll just go over it real quick. So you start off with your base case. If they pass you in a uninitialized array, or if the array doesn't have any elements, we can return false by default. Otherwise, we're going to create a hash set which will only contain unique elements. We'll call it checked numbers. We will then loop through the entire array, and then we will create a local variable that stores the current index, or the current number at the current index. We will check to see if the hash set contains this current number. If it does, that means we've come across it in a previous iteration, and we want to return true because that means we found a duplicate. Otherwise, add it to the hash set, and then keep iterating. If we don't find any duplicates, we'll get out of the for loop, and we can return false. So if I walk through an example real quick, from a high level in this example, because we know 1's the duplicate, let's just say we start at number 1. So we'd come here, the current number would be 1. Does checked numbers contain 1? No. So we'll add it in the else statement. And then we would eventually come across the next one at the last index. And because at the first index we added it to our hash set, when it comes to this if statement, checked numbers will contain 1, so we can return true. And in that case, this would work. And because there's only one for loop, our time complexity would be O of n, because we're only traversing it based on the amount of numbers in the array. And our space complexity would also be n. So that's kind of the trade-off here. So you only have n, or O of big N, and space time of n as well, because we have to create a hash set that will store numbers linear to the amount of elements in the array. And this is pretty much it. These are two solutions you can use. I'm sure there's other solutions, or may even be of another solution where it's time of n and space that's constant. But for this, I'll just go over these two solutions. I'm sorry if I confuse at any point. I'm kind of new to making these videos, but like I said, any feedback, good or bad, would be greatly appreciated in the comment section. I think that is all. So have a great day and goodbye.